1 Samuel chapter 9. 1 Samuel chapter 9. In I say stories, the real life happenings. 1 Samuel chapter 9, the first few verses we got through like verse 2 or 3 last week. But if you just need to know that God has you, that God is in control, that God is over everything, and he's very, very good and gracious and merciful, stories like this are what you need to read and understand. Remember, the backdrop has been Israel has literally rejected God as their king. And he's warned them about what would happen. He keeps saying this is what the king is going to take. And they don't care. And Samuel has done what God's told him to do. And yet in this you'll see that whilst God steps back, he doesn't just come after them. There's mercy, there's grace, there's also discipline, and there's also all kinds of things. But all through this, if you wanted to summarize these next chapters, simply God is sovereign. I mean, he is in control of everything, and he takes care of everything. In verse 3, remember what's coming is that they've asked for a king, and God's going to give them a king, and so he's going to anoint Saul. And as we read the story, Saul is the most unlikely character there is. The only thing that Saul has going for him is he's taller and more handsome than anybody else. It's probably not the greatest qualifications to have. He's not spiritual. We'll show that. He doesn't even know who Samuel is. If you'd been going and doing what you should have been doing, anyone spiritual would have known Samuel, but he doesn't know who he is. He's never met Samuel. They get introduced here. There's just no spiritual life really in Saul. And I believe God's going to teach all kinds of stuff through Saul. And it's amazing, right? They demand a king. And whilst God gives them a king, I think God gives them Saul to teach them, to show them. They don't get to choose their king. God is going to do the king. And the way God works, the way God moves is, and we said it, is donkeys stray away. This is not God saying, oh, there happens to be donkeys, let's get him going. God moves the donkeys. Think about what that infers in your life. If you believe that, then it starts to quell some fears and some worries. It starts to give us an awe and respect of God. And these donkeys stray. And I want you to see, as you read the story, you'll find out that nothing is coincidence. That Saul's dad, Kish, donkeys are a big deal. It's not just one donkey, it's donkeys. And he happens to ask his son. It all seems commonplace. It all seems like this is no big deal. Donkeys have probably strayed before. We'll find them. We'll go back to regular life. You ever notice that God can interrupt regular life pretty quick? And what he's doing in your life, you may not have a clue, but hold on. And so he says, take a servant. Now think about that for a second. That might seem like a small, insignificant moment. Like Saul, I mean, it's practical, it's common sense. Take someone with you. Take a servant. But do you know what no one else knew? That God, I don't know, have a clue how old the servant was, what his name is, how long he'd been there. But whenever he got the job as servant in Kish's household, you know what he didn't imagine? One day I'll be in the Bible. You know what he never knew? That I'm going to be a part of Samuel anointing Saul. That God is going to give him wisdom and understanding and perfect timing. Which, ladies, if a man has perfect timing, that has to be God. But do you understand that I don't know how he became a servant? I don't know how he got there. But God saw this servant. God looks at you and he knows exactly what he's going to do with you. He doesn't tell you everything, because if he told you everything, you'd cry like a little baby and never come back out. And so he just lets you think you're on this journey. If you had asked Saul, what's happening? We're looking for donkeys. That's it. That's it. He can't believe when Samuel tells him, basically, you're going to be king. He's gobsmacked. He knows he's not the right choice, humanly speaking. He is the right choice because it's God's choice. But do you notice, and you'll see that this servant, this so-called, do you think that God puts people in your path that you might need? You think you figured it out, like, hey, I need you. So God puts people in your path that are going to play a vital role in what he's doing in your life. And you didn't say, hey, I pick you so that I can get wisdom later. He's a servant. He doesn't get any, it's funny, right? A servant, when Saul says, hey, you coming with me, guess what the servant's choice is? He's going. And all he's doing is going on a journey to find some donkeys. Take a servant with you and go look for the donkeys. Verse 4, so blasé, so normal, so just. So Saul took one of the servants and traveled through the hill country of Ephraim, the land of Shalishah, the Shalim area, and the entire land of Benjamin. And here it is. The same God who let the donkeys go is the same God who can what? Hide the donkeys. No matter how great the search party is, no matter what's happening, if God wants to do something, he's going to what? If he wants to reveal something to you, guess what? He can and he will. But if he wants to hide something from you, remember the dudes on the road to Emmaus? It was hid from them who he was. They were literally talking to Jesus and couldn't see it until he revealed it to them. And then they said, you understand that if God wants, sometimes, what was it someone said today? I tried to remember. I always think I'll remember that, and guess what? Basically, you don't have to force what God's going to do. Like, if you force things, it doesn't happen. But when God wants to happen, it just happens. And so it's kind of funny. They've gone through the entire land of Benjamin. They say the man could probably walk 20 miles a day. So they're 3 days in, the Bible tells. So they've walked like 60 miles. I don't know about you, but 60 miles in, when I can't find a silly donkey, I'm probably not saying, God, this is awesome. I'm going to be in the Bible. I got your plan. This is so much fun. 60 miles, give or take. I don't know. I might have walked 5 miles. So who knows? I mean, they say 20, whatever. It doesn't really matter. 40 miles, 50 miles. I mean, at what mileage do you like? I just want to give up on the donkeys. I couldn't care less anymore. So here they are, 3 days. And they couldn't find the donkeys anywhere. You can imagine. You seen a donkey? No. I mean, how far can the donkeys have gone? Who's feeding it? I mean, anyway, you get the point. Verse 5, it says, finally. It seems like that sometimes, right? There's a long path. God's very, very patient. You know that, right? And if God knows you need to go down a certain path for a year or two, he's fine with that. We're not. But he is. 3 days ain't nothing for God. They entered the region of Zuph, and Saul said to his servant, here it is. Saul just wants to what? Okay, why can't Saul go home? It seems like an insignificant conversation. Why can't Saul go home? Well, it's not that he hasn't found the donkey. He won't find the donkeys. It's because he is about to be anointed king. He has to run into Samuel. He has to. Samuel's the prophet. Samuel's the judge. Samuel is the one who's going to anoint him with the oil. So if God needs you to be anointed king, guess what he orchestrates? You're going to run slap back, bang into Samuel. Now, God could have arranged it. If Saul goes home, it's not like God's like, oh. Samuel could have gone to his house. But God has a plan. And Saul says, I'm going home. And look, the Bible even tells you what the mindset is. I've been gone 3 days. I'm going to take a while to get back. By the time, my dad's going to be more worried about us than about what? Saul's dad, Kish, didn't think it would take that long to find donkeys. Probably thought he'd be back in an hour or two. Like, not a big deal. I don't think he thought he was going to be gone that long. And by the way, there's a problem there because resources and everything else, they're on a journey. I mean, if you pack for a vacation for a week and you're gone 2 months, you've got problems. Should have taken more money. Should have planned out our food better. We should have rationed on day 2. We went overboard. And in verse 6, it seems like such a small detail. but God speaks through a servant, and he says, and this says, and I think not every version says this, but I think it nails what the Bible means. It says, I've just thought of something. In verse 6, the servant said, I've just thought of something. And I really believe that's exactly what happened. By the way, how much voice does a servant have? If Saul says we're going home, and he's wanting to go home, you know what the servant has to do? Yeah. I don't know how close they are. I don't know. But he's like, hey, Saul, I've just thought of something. Is that really what happened? At the right moment, this should give every man some hope. As clueless as we are sometimes, God at the right time, in the right way, can drop something in our mind and we just say it and we have no idea. The servant thinks, and this is what's crazy. Saul doesn't think of it. I've told you, Israel's in spiritual decline, but there's a shining light. There's someone who has God on his side. Who is it? It's Samuel. Saul doesn't think to go to Samuel. Doesn't even cross his mind. But his servant says, hold on a minute. Who's that dude? And God puts it in the servant's mind, go and find Samuel. Oh, and even at this moment, even if he knew it was God, do you know what he thinks God's doing for him? Simply, all he wants Samuel to tell him, where are the donkeys? His prayer is, God, reveal to me where the donkeys are. If you tell me that, I'll leave you in peace. How many times do you pray something and you think God's shaking his head like, oh, you poor little thing? This has got nothing to do with donkeys. In fact, when I tell you where the donkeys are, you're going to be on the floor because they're back home. And he says, let's go. Look, and look, subtly, not so subtly sometimes, God is training us and God is showing us and God is helping us. And look at what he says. There is some dude, is that what he says? There is a man of God. Stop for a minute. That means somewhere, somehow, this servant has been taught about Samuel. I don't know what the connection is. I don't know. But God, let's just say this happened on a Monday. I don't have biblical evidence for that, so don't go and fact check me and say it wasn't Monday. Okay. You know, months, years ago, before that day, even on the Friday, maybe before, but somewhere along the line, God has introduced Samuel to this man because he needs to know that weeks down the line. You see, we often think that God reveals stuff to us that we need today. That's not true. God can be telling you, teaching you something that you might not need for ages. And here's how good God is. Let's face it, if God said, hey, I'm going to teach you something today that in 12 years and 2 months and 5 hours you're going to need. What's our problem with that? Oh, yeah. 12 minutes I might be in trouble. 12 years, I ain't got fat chance. People tell me something on a Sunday, I say I'll do it Monday, and Wednesday comes and like, well, that went. You know, but remember what Jesus told the disciples in that moment. He tells them what to say, but the Spirit of God is able to reveal to us exactly what we need to remember. Like God has never said, cross your fingers and just do mind games, like get your memory right because I'm going to need you to be smart. Well, if he needs us to be smart, we're all in trouble. Because we can't be that smart. But just when I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but God just shows you something or reminds you of something that you hadn't thought about in 20 years. But God has revealed Samuel, not to Saul, but he's revealed it to his servant. And the servant says, there is a man of God, and he knows where he lives. Saul, he lives right here. I think the servant's kind of like, He's right there. And he's like, he lives in this town. They don't have to travel. Hey, we just so happen to be in his what? In his neighborhood. Why not drop in? He is held in, listen to what he says. And this is vital. Think about this through with me, and I'm trying to do my best to make this make sense. When Saul gets told he's going to be the king of Israel by Samuel, what does he need to know about Samuel? Samuel is the one that's going to tell him, you're God's choice for king. What does he need to know about Samuel? He's a man of God. What else? He's a prophet, a true prophet. And so God needs him to, what'd you say? There you go. That's a big part of it. He doesn't say some things the guy's pretty dead on most of the time. What the servant has believed is everything means this. And do you see that God gave, how wild is this? That part of the reason God gave things to Samuel that came true is for this moment. You see how God's doing stuff far above, like God has given Samuel things to prophesy because he needs them prophesied in that moment, but God is also building a track record in Samuel where people can trust him. So imagine Samuel is prophesying this stuff, it comes true, and there's a reason for that. There's a moment there, like a near moment, like I'm doing this because I need to meet a need or whatever. But God is all, and by the way, Samuel doesn't have to build his reputation. God is doing it. Just do what I tell you to do and I'll take care of it. And look at what he says. He's a man of God. That's big. He lives here in this town. That's convenient. He is held in high honor by who? By all the people. So if Saul hears Samuel and he says that guy's nuts, everyone's like, no, he ain't. If he's in local nut bar, if Samuel is a local crazy person, when Samuel says you're going to be king, he'll be like, yeah, all right. God has built Samuel up. And look at what he says. He's held in high honor. Why? Because he's rich? No. Because everything he says comes what? Do you catch a correlation? The only reason he can say everything that it comes true is because he's a man of... Okay. You see how intricate God is? And don't for a minute think, well, that was back in the day and God doesn't do that with my life. Hold on, he does. You're on a path you have no idea about. God is putting people in your life. If the truth be known, if Jesus came down and just said, this is the last 2 weeks, we'd be flummoxed. Let's go find him. Oh, convenient. Let's go find him and look at what he says. It's almost like he's kind of, hey, Saul, I don't want, perhaps. It's kind of a weird thing to say, right? You're trying to nudge him this way, but he's kind of, perhaps he will tell us which way. Look at what the servant, see, the servant has wisdom, but he doesn't know everything. But God is using him to move Saul. Again, what is the servant asking for? I just want someone to tell me where the donkey is so I can get home with you. Saul, let's go. Maybe he's got something. And what does the devil always do? Whenever someone is leaning the right way, whenever your life is going the right way, whenever there's people in your life being used by God to turn you a certain direction, what does the devil do? The servant says, let's go and see Samuel. Let's go and see Samuel. And the first thing that comes in Saul's mind is what? And this is a good thing. It's their culture. Is that like that in Israel? Do they always give gifts when they visit? Is it like, I mean, they say that's that kind of culture, right? Where you don't go empty-handed. And so Saul is like, I would go. Yeah, I don't have any. Look at what he says. But we don't have anything to offer him. And here's where I really get like intermingled with the story. Even our food is gone. Listen, if our food is gone, let's just get home. Look, I mean, I'm making a joke about that, but just stop. If you've read on, then that's fine. If you haven't read on, and he's just said our food is gone, and God needs them to be sustained, what do you think God's going to provide them? And guess what you'll find? Best piece of meat and bread on the way. Because that's what God does. Like you can't say to God, I got no food. Oh, I'm sorry, you think food? If food's your problem, bam. Don't let anything stop you from doing my will, because I can fill what... If that's your reason, I can't go because we have nothing or food, then here, I can fix that easy. And they reckon it's about $10 in today's, if you did someone was smarter than me that did this math. The guy had about $10. Look at what it says. He says, our food is gone, and we don't have anything to what? Do you know that's a lie of the devil? I don't have anything to give, so I'm not going to give anything. Too old. Too young, too messed up. If you've got the Spirit of God, you've always got something to give. See, we think it's only special if you have $1,000 to give. This guy had very little to give. And by the way, if you're trying to pay Samuel off, you might want to do a bit better. Like, dude, I don't want you $10. He says, I don't have anything to give him. Verse 8. And by the way, they have a silver piece. They've ran out of food. And yet still somehow he's kept the what? You think that's just coincidence that he happened to have one small silver piece left? God makes provision for you. Like, why didn't they spend that? I'm going to level with you. If my food's gone and I've got any kind of money, no, I've got no money. But I'll have food. I mean, think about that. If you got no food left and yet you've still got something to buy food with, what are we doing? Like if my servant says, no, I'm going to keep this for a rainy day. Rainy day's here, dude. I'm hungry. God, this guy wasn't like, hey, Saul, I'm going to preserve this because we're going to be talked about in Georgia. But God offers this. And by the way, if he didn't have a small silver piece, one could have just appeared. God can do whatever he wants. And he says, we can at least offer it to the man of God and see what happens. At best, the servant's like, let's just try it. We're here. You know what's more frustrating? Here, have my last piece of money. Where's the donkeys? Don't know. Thanks for visiting. Let's just go and see what happens. In those days, if people wanted a message from God, they would say, let's go and ask a seer. For prophets used to be called seers. So there, if you hear the word seer, it just means prophet. Remember, there's kind of three things prophets did. They foretold, they told forth, and they led praise and worship, kind of. And so they would foretell. They would say things that are going to happen that haven't yet happened. They would tell forth. They would take what God has said, what God has already said, his principles, his promises, his word, and they would just tell. Kind of like what we do today. We tell what God has said. But they also had this place of leading worship and being that kind of, and we'll see that in a minute. But look at what it says. Verse 10. All right, Saul agreed. Let's what? Let's try it. How does a tired guy that's got no food decide let's just give it a whirl? Because God's all over it. So they started into the town where the man of God lived. How many of them said, this is going to be awesome. You're going to be the next king. You sit at home tonight and predict tomorrow. Let's be honest with you. In the last 10 years, is this where you thought you'd be spiritually? Is your life like I knew we were heading down this street 10 years ago? You know what 10 years ago? You know the last place I thought I'd live was? I didn't even know this place existed, honestly. Imagine 10 years from now. You think we're like, I know exactly. I get it. I get why people, I'm not that way. I get why people are. I got a 10-year plan. I would love to see that. I get it. The smartness, that I understand that. But let's be honest. If you nail your 10-year plan, you should be up here. 10 years ago, did you really think you'd be where you are tonight in all kinds of ways? But God understands everything. And so Saul says, let's try it. Kind of seems like last chance corral, but God's all over it. So they started into the town where the man of God lived. Here the story takes another twist. As they were climbing the hill to the town, remember what's on their mind? Donkeys and probably food, and let's just get home. He's worried about his dad. My dad's going to be like, where are you going? What happened? And this is funny. And I say it's funny because women didn't speak to men like this. I heard one preacher say it's because he's tall and handsome. Maybe that's exactly why. Normally strange men and that, the women, they didn't speak to them. They would be afraid of them. Saul's like tall and handsome, so maybe the ladies were just like, hey there. I have no idea. I can't prove that, but they start. But you understand, right, that God moved the women and they've been messing around, standing around, wasting time, like, what are we going to do? But just at the millisecond that God needed them to intertwine, he got it done. In all the world, he needs like 4 people, 5 people, however many women there are, to meet at one point. And guess what? God did it. You don't have to strive to. Sometimes I think we're like, I have to get my name out there. I have to meet the right person. Nah. God can put you in touch with the right person at just the right second. Like, how did we all end up together? What are the chances of us all being in this room tonight? 50 years ago. I wasn't even around, so I had no chance of being here. You understand that God orchestrates that? That this isn't God like, oh, now move. They happened to, oh, that got lucky. He orchestrates everything. And they're climbing in the hill. They met some young women coming out to draw. They thought, what did they think they were doing? They went out to draw water. You know what they didn't know? They'd be in the Bible too. Or, what did you do today? Man, I drew water and I'm going to be, they won't know me, but man, in 2025, they'll still be talking about me and going to draw water. See, it's so mundane. Like drawing water. Maybe going to work is so mundane and boring, but it's right there where God's going to do something tomorrow. Maybe it just seems like another ordinary day, another boring moment, another thing. And yet God's like, oh, if you only knew. Like, this is a tiny piece of the story. But they're going out to draw water. What do they care about? All they care about is what? Water. And look at what it says. So Saul and his servant said, is the seer here today? You know what's going to, God orchestrates everything. What happens if they're like, no, he ain't, and he ain't going to be back for 2 months? Where's Samuel? Right where he needs to what? Look what happens. Yes, they replied. Huh. Well, that's good. Coincidence, right? And they don't just say yes, they say what? We know exactly where he is and what he's doing. We know exactly where he is and what he's doing. Now, look, sometimes you can get lucky and it's habit. Like he's at Chick-fil-A. Well, that was a good guess. All right. But he says, stay right on the road. He's at the town gates. He's just arrived. Huh. Lucky. To take part in a public sacrifice up at the place of worship. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on. There are on high places, places of worship. The tabernacle doesn't have the Ark of the Covenant. But there's one person that knows what's going on. We'll find out in the story. You know who knows what's going on? Samuel. You know what Samuel knows? The night before. You know what Samuel knows? There's a dude coming tomorrow. And when you see him, that's your man. Remember, Samuel doesn't even want to anoint the dude because he knows, but God's told him, do everything they ask you. Do what I tell you to do. He tells Samuel, there's a dude coming tomorrow. When you meet him, tell him. You think Samuel went to bed that night like that ain't going to happen? See, the women say he's about to set up, he's got 30 people with him. He set up this party, this sacrifice. But he knows exactly what he's doing, only because God's told him. He's the only one clued in. You see, and that's weird about God too. You might be the only one clued in, or you might not be, but it doesn't matter. God's going to do it all. If you need to be clued in on everything, walking with God is going to be really difficult. If you're the only one that God is speaking to, and you can't handle that, and no one else understands or believes it, you're going to have trouble too. Samuel's the only one that knows what's going on. So if you can't handle that, you're going to be in trouble. Sometimes God has revealed something to you that he hasn't told anybody else. Look what happens. He's taking part in a public sacrifice up to the place of worship. Hurry and catch him. Hurry and catch him. Huh. You know where Samuel's going? Nowhere. Before he goes up there to eat, listen to what they say. And this is just a regular thing, right? This is what Samuel does. The guests won't eat till what? Until he arrives to bless the food. Little does Saul know, he's about to be the main man at this party. He has no idea. The choicest piece of meat. There, you can imagine what we'd be like. I've been on a journey for 3 days. I stink. I don't look my best. This is not the time to throw me a party. God doesn't care about any of that. You're hungry? When they were hungry, do you think they sat there and said, don't worry, God's going to give you the choicest piece of meat? Obviously. He doesn't tell you. He just lets you walk into it so that you just know it's him. If they'd had enough money, it's not the same thing. So God lets you go low on money sometimes just to show you. Look at what it says. Hurry and catch in verse 13. The guest won't begin eating until he arrives to bless the food. So they entered the town. And as they passed through the gates, who happened to be coming out? Samuel was coming out toward them to go up to the place of what? Notice how faithful Samuel is. He's going out to the place of worship. Believing what? Believing God's going to do what he said he was going to do. Now the Lord had told Samuel the previous day, verse 15, about this time what? You see what we would do about this? So it's 7:03. If God says to us about this time tomorrow, we look for him at 12 noon. That's not what he said. We're crazy sometimes. Like, I knew God wasn't going to show up. Well, hold on. What did he say? About this time tomorrow. So give him a few minutes. About this time means. So if it's 7:05, just hold on. He'll be there. But God's given all this precise information so that nobody even reading it today can be like, that won't God, that's just lucky. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What is God showing us and what is God showing Samuel? What he already knows. God, I see everything. It's exactly what I spoke on Sunday. God sees the winds. God knows everything. So the Lord told Samuel the previous day, about this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of what? You know what? When you know exactly what's going to happen, you can be very, very what? Precise. You know what tea readers can't be? You know what tarot card people can't be? Very precise. Because the more precise they get, the more fake they become. Watch fake healers on TV. They'll stand in a crowd of 20,000 and profess someone's got a headache. Well, that was a good shot, dude. They'll get very vague. One of you's ill. Well, that's a good chance too, isn't it? One of you's old. Well, there you go. They can't get precise. Because the more precise they go, the more chance they have of being what? Like people that play the lottery, do they want 6 numbers or 66 numbers? He says, they're coming from the land of what? Benjamin. God sees it all. I hope we listen that clearly to what God is telling us sometimes, because maybe it's getting late, and maybe you just want to get this through, and someone said, where are you from? The land of where? If it's not Benjamin, you know what you can't do? Yeah. He says, when you see him, anoint him to be the leader of my people. You know that's difficult for Samuel, right? Samuel doesn't even want a king, but God's told him. And listen to what he says. And this is crazy. If you don't think God can use you, Saul isn't even spiritual. And yet God says, through him, I'm going to rescue you from the Philistines. God's already done that in chapter 7. God's already shown his hand and done all this stuff. And this is absolutely crazy. And this is both sides of the Lord and both sides of God. And we don't get it. He's told them you don't want a king. And he'll tell them afterwards, you've rejected me. And yet, I smile because I think God allows Saul to be king just to prove a point, just to make them understand. There's many reasons. But he says to them, look at what it says. I have looked down on my people in mercy and have heard what? You see what God does? He's like, man, I'm not going to leave you just in the hands of what? I'm not going to leave you in the hands of Saul. I love you. And yes, you have to learn. And yes, I'm going to discipline you. And yes, you're doing the wrong thing. But do you see how much mercy God has? Now, mercy doesn't mean they're going to get away with it. Mercy doesn't mean, we rejected God and nothing bad. No, you can't reject God and not pay for that. But God looks in compassion on his people. And what he doesn't want to do is ever leave them properly without a shepherd. And so he'll always be their shepherd. And I promise you this. It doesn't look like it. You might not see it, but God is always looking after Israel. Still today. And he will in the end. In the Holocaust, did it look like it? No. Does it look like it today? Does it look like today, I want to be an Israelite because that's a favorite place? No. But one day, it's going to be clear that God was always looking out for his people. And he looks in mercy. Aren't you glad when you mess up, God does that? And it says, and I've heard their cry. He's heard their cry for a king, but there's this struggle. They need more, they want more, and he knows it. And what they want is more peace and more joy and more power, and they think it's in a king, but it's not, it's in God. But it's the same in Egypt, right? He heard their cry and he responded. I don't know about you, but it gives me comfort tonight to know I can be totally on the wrong page and God still has mercy on me. And then look what it says. And this is what I love. When Samuel first saw Saul, he didn't know it was him. He's walking to the place of worship. And Samuel has been told what? Around this time you're going to meet him. So Samuel goes assuming what? I'm just going to meet him. You catch that, right? He didn't stay panicked. He's walking to the place. He happens to run into Saul, and look what it says. And God is very good, very gracious. He makes it clear. God doesn't want Samuel to have this like, is it him? Is it him? Is it him? He didn't have this big thing like, is it you? What's your name? Where did you come from? He didn't do any of that. Look at what it says. When Samuel saw Saul, what did God say? That's him. He's going to rule my people. You know what Samuel had to say in that moment? All right? And by the way, humanly speaking, just like Peter, just like me, just like you, how does he not even know who Samuel is? You catch that? He didn't know Samuel. The servants heard about Samuel. Old Saul doesn't even know who Samuel is. Saul isn't spiritual. He hasn't been going to church like a good boy. He isn't in the choir. He hasn't been doing the churchy things. He's been out in left field. And yet God says, it's him. The only thing he has is being tall and handsome. And God says, it's him. How much does God have to do for Saul? When God says, you're my king, how much does God have to do for him? Absolutely everything. If you need wisdom, where's he getting it from? If you need anything, God's going to give him it. And he's about to show it. Look at what it says. That's the man I told you about. He will rule my people. Verse 18. Just then Saul approached Samuel. Oh, you ever walked into something and you have no idea what was about to happen? we know the story, but catch it. Saul's approaching Samuel at the gateway, and he asked, hey, this is how clueless Saul is. Can you please tell me where the seer's house is? And Samuel says, hey, dude, I'm him. So clearly the servant didn't really know who he was either, right? He would have been jumping up, there he is, but he's heard of him. He's heard of him. And check this out. You talk about a baptism of fire. You talk about just walking, plodding along in your life, and then God said, and by the way, God's good for the training. If you need quick, long, he knows you. He made you. He knows exactly what you need to do what he needs you to do. Like how good a trainer do you think God is? You ever had good or bad trainers in workplaces, supervisors? You ever needed someone at your business to show the newbies what to do? Not newbies. The new people. God's pretty good at that. I'll train them. I bet they're all right. And look at what he says. Can you please tell me where the seer... You ever ask God a question and been shocked by the answer? I'm the seer. Okay. All right. If it's him, what does Saul know about this man? He's a man of God. He doesn't make mistakes. He's high honored. Oh, you're him, huh? Yep. Go up to the place of worship ahead of me. Hold on. I'm not bothered about places of worship. I just want to find a stinking donkey. That's it. Tell me you wouldn't be like that, some of us. Great. I would love to come and do whatever you're doing, but I've got a task. All I want you to do, dude, is tell me, do you know where my donkey is or not? That's it. Can we just do that? Please, stop. And he's like, hey, I'm not going to tell you about the... He does, but look at what he says. Go up to the place of worship ahead of me. We will eat there together. Well, okay, right, you get my attention now. And this is amazing. You think God isn't bringing confidence in Samuel? Imagine being Samuel. I'll tell you what you want to know. I'll tell you what you want and send you on your way. In the morning, I'll tell you what you want to know. All right. What would you be thinking if you're Saul? A, I want to know it. And B, dude, you have no idea what I want. Just give me the blooming address of the donkeys and we'll be gone. And just before Saul would back off, just before Saul would be like, this dude's crazy, he's lost it. Think about the tantalizing stuff that Samuel is throwing out. I'll tell you what to know. I'll send you on your way. And then he says, oh, and by the way, you can imagine Saul's mind going like 100 miles an hour, right? And then nonchalantly, like just so like slyly, he's like, by the way, dude, those donkeys you were, what? Those donkeys that you're worried about, that you will, and look at what he says. Those donkeys that were lost 3 days ago. How do you know that? You see, God is preparing the king. I'm omniscient. I'm ever present. I'm all-knowing. I'm the God of precision. I'm the God of provision. I could spend hours telling you what God is telling them in this moment. And he says, don't worry about those donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, for they have been found. Sweet. Hold on. What are you going to tell me? Like, you're going to give me this big news tomorrow, but you've just given me the news I wanted, right? The donkeys are good. Ergo, I can just what? If the donkeys are good, I'm good. And then he says something that absolutely gobsmacks Samuel, or Saul. And I'm here to tell you, God's brought you to me, and to tell you and your family, you are the focus of all Israel's hopes. What? God, through Samuel, speaks to Saul and says, hey, you remember, what's Israel's hope? A king. You know what God is saying? Hey, Saul, you don't know me very well, but you're about to. And this king they have hopes for, by the way, is you and your family. Huh. You see in that anointing, who gets a choice of that? Nobody. You know who can deny it? Nobody. God's not interested in our opinion. God's not interested in other people's opinion. When he puts an anointing on you, he puts an anointing on you. And well, imagine if people are like, why Saul? That could be a relevant question. Why Saul? You know what the answer to that is? Because I said so. And look at what happens. And Did he get it? Look at what he says. I'm only from the tribe of Benjamin. We are the smallest tribe in Israel. And this isn't even true. How is Kish introduced to us? His father. He's very influential and very what? Rich. What are the chances, therefore, he's the least of his tribe? 0. But there's this like hesitation, there's this like humility, it's actually a good trait, I think. And he's like, because better than being like, hey, I'm ready, you're not ready, you're about to hide in the... And do you get it? When they were anointing Saul's been thinking about this. Saul's known before Samuel was first and Saul is second to know what God's doing. And he says, my family is the least important of all the families of that tribe. Well, that's probably not true. Why are you talking like this to me? It's not my idea. And quickly, and we'll pray. Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and placed them at the head of the table. You think that freaked them out a bit? You see how quickly God can change your life? A minute ago, you were 2 dudes looking for a donkey with no food. Now you're sitting at the place of honor at some special deal. They honored them above the 30 special guests. It's a bit uncomfortable, a bit weird. His servant's like, I wonder if Saul's like, that's the last time I take advice from you. Samuel instructed the cook to bring Saul the finest cut of meat. Remember what God said? It's all about who? It's all about the king. Why does he get that? Oh, no, you wanted it this way. He's your king. Well, why is he? No, I told you. King takes everything. He brought in the meat and placed it before Saul. And Samuel says, go ahead and eat it. I was saving it for you even before I invited these what? Samuel so trusted the word of the Lord that he said, get me some choice meat, and we're inviting 30 people. For who? I don't know, but God's coming. See, in little details, Samuel was obedient. You know what you can't do? You can't arrange the food and you can't arrange the party if you have to meet Saul before you believe it. He prepared because he believed that God said what he was doing. It's kind of like us. If you think Jesus is coming back, you probably should do something about that now. Not wait till he does. If he sits at home like, come on, this time tomorrow, he invites guests because he believes God's coming. Because God said he's coming. He has at that night, if you ask Samuel, who you anointing? Some dude from the tribe of Benjamin. That's it. That's all I know. It's funny how you have to walk in faith sometime with little information. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. When they came down from the place of worship and they returned to town, Samuel took Saul up to the roof of the house and prepared a bed for him there. At daybreak the next morning, Samuel called to Saul, get up, get out. It's time you're on your way. So Saul got ready, and he and Samuel left the house together. When they reached the edge of the town, Samuel told Saul to send his servant on ahead. And after the servant was gone, Samuel said, stay here. Why? I have received a special message for you from God. And what we'll find next week is the very next thing to happen is what? A flask of oil is on his head. And that day he becomes Israel's king. He's anointed with the Spirit of God. He's anointed as God's king. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? So I don't know if you're discouraged tonight or defeated tonight or don't know what God's doing. But if you read this story, you should know that God knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And what you think is a rough situation, what you think is a bad situation, what you think maybe is confusing, God is all over it. And Saul is left like, I can't believe that just happened to me. But God can anoint you pretty quick. God can use you pretty quick. God can change your circumstances pretty quick. And before he knew it, Saul was king of Israel. There's so many things in that story. We could go on and on. But hopefully I've made the point that God was all over this. And everything that story points to is God's got you, God knows, God's powerful, God understands, God sees the end, God arranges every situation. Does anyone have any questions?